Okay, so moving on to the next topic, which happens to be the second to the last one. The topic is HR tech and fast-growing corporates, to be handled by Andy Turnbull. I hope I got the spelling right. Andy Turnbull is responsible for people operations and technology at Bolt, and prior to joining Bolt, Andy consulted with the HR technology and transformation space with firms such as Capgemini and All Allied Solutions. Do we have Andy here? Hi, Andy.
Hi there, Tayo. How you doing?
How are you doing?
Yeah, pleasure to be everyone, and thank you so much to the panelists as well. Super inspired and energized after that discussion. There's lots of recurring themes in what I'm going to be sharing too. So thank you once again. I'll go ahead and share if that's okay, Tayo.
Sure.
Okie dokie. Can you guys see okay?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can see.
Big hello to everyone. Really excited to be joining the summit today. As introduced, I'm Andy Turnbull from Bolt. I'm responsible for people operations and people technology. I'm going to give a quick intro and some context on who we are as an organization before I jump in. But what I'm really keen to focus on today is some key takeaways, tips and hints we've learned on our journey, and HR technology for fast-growing corporates like ourselves. And I think, you know, there's certainly, especially after the topics I hear everyone is really passionate about in the panel discussion, there's lots of takeaways also for those of you who maybe aren't as fast-growing. Lots of topics which align with different organizations too. So excited to get started. So as I say, a bit of context on us as Bolt first of all. Who are we? So we're a leading mobility app in Europe and Africa, but globally as well. Big focus on both Europe and Africa though. And what are we really trying to achieve? So you'll know us in Africa first and foremost for being a ride-hailing app, but we're much larger than that. So the whole onus of what we're working on is to change how we move around cities. So as you can see from this visualization here, the way we move around cities is very much geared up towards private car ownership, around 42% in cities globally. And what we want to be is part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And we actually want to be replacing these private cars, which take up a lot of space and pollute a lot, with these alternatives. So ride hailing, which is our largest business area, car rentals, which we're working on, public transport, micro-mobility and walking. So really what we want to be is part of the solution, if you like, in helping us move around these cities a bit better. And what do I mean by a fast growth company? So this is just some context as to why I would categorize us as Bolt as a fast growth or even a hyper growth organization. So our business has grown 13 times in the last 4 years in terms of our GMV run rate. We operate in 45 countries. So some of them we have employees on the ground, and then others we operate via partners and they're just using our technology. We operate in 300 different cities. So, a huge, vastly different population audience for our products. We have 75 million customers, 2.5 million drivers that we offer employment opportunities to, and a globally dispersed team of more than 3,000 with big plans to hire going into 2022. So what are we doing in Africa, and why am I talking to this esteemed audience today? So we launched in Africa back in 2016. We're now live in 7 countries. We first launched in South Africa, and pleased to say we're now the leading ride-hailing app there. We're also active in Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, Tunisia, Tanzania, and Uganda, with more plans to expand in terms of countries and products as well. So really, our hypergrowth journey is very Africa-focused as it stands today. So what's unique about us? Just want to kind of put you in the mindset and the psyche of an employee at Bolt before we kind of jump into some HR tech-focused stuff. So we're all about efficiency and frugality. So one of the key ways we try and differentiate versus some of our larger competitors that you might know of is we want to be super efficient and super frugal. We don't want to overspend. we really spend money carefully like it's our own. And that's a good segue into the next one, which is acting like an owner. So we try and think big and optimize, not just for our team, but for the company as a whole. So often we'll make sacrifices for our department or our sub-team, thinking about the better interests of the company as a whole. We also offer a lot more ownership than maybe you'd see in a typical company. So a lot more flexibility for managers and employees actually on the ground in their teams. So in each country, we almost operate in this entrepreneurial type way where we offer a lot of flexibility about, what can we do and how do we actually know this localized market and how can we adjust it? And we try and reflect that also in our support for our people that we operate through, people operations and through our people technology team. And we also call ourselves honey badgers. So we're not employees, we're honey badgers. And we say that's because we're fearless, responsible and smart. And then a bit about the, the complexity of our workforce also. So we have many business lines. As I say, ride hailing is a key one for us, but we have all sorts of other business lines, which are actually, regularly coming up with new ones also. So we recently launched this product called Bulk Market, which is about 15-minute grocery deliveries in Europe. That's one example. And many different worker types. So I'm sure like many of you joining us today, we don't just have one specific type of worker. We have many office-based workers, but many frontline workers also, like the ones pictured here. We operate electric scooters and electric bikes and other micro-mobility across Europe, and also via our bulk market products. We have lots of couriers and lots of pickers, your kind of Amazon type employees also. So very different workforce with very different needs, and we really have to factor that in our HR technology thinking. And then the other thing is we're hugely dispersed, right? So we have employees in more than 30 countries, and then in about 15 other countries, we have partners who we aren't employing directly. So everything we do, we really have to think about, well, will this work in all 30 of our countries? So super important to keep in mind. So I just want to share what I refer to, and sometimes it's commonly referred to in the HR tech space as phase zero. And I just want to go into some detail about tips and tricks and what we've learned about phase zero. So on selecting tools and sometimes more importantly, selecting partners, I really wouldn't rely too much on industry analysts like Fosway and Gartner. I think they're invaluable sources of information, brilliant data and perspective that they provide, but this should really be one of many different data points, and you should really be relying on all sorts of different data points here, rather than just one or two key centralized global sources. But what we found is, if you really want to be looking at not just the very large players, but the latest and greatest in terms of the more small, agile, startup type HR technologies that's been, some of which have been mentioned in our discussions this week, it can take a couple of years for these type of players to gain traction and to actually enter these type of analyses. So really important to, yes, read them in depth, understand them, use them, but don't use that as your sole source when you're selecting different technologies. Always, reach out to other customers, reach out to your networks and use other sources too. Next one is socializing your plans with other HQ functions. So I think this really shows some synergies with what the panel were talking around. Really build up that those communications with finance and with IT, whether you're divorced or you're married. Really important not to make the mistake of both deploying similar solutions or not really thinking about the next steps, maybe deploying a best of breed solution, when actually what you need in the long term is an ERP and you should be building towards that. So something to think about. Always socialize your plans early and often and make the most of the long-term roadmap. So the next one is piloting. So as I say here, plug and play SaaS is the new normal. So what I'm referring to here is the fact that, in the past, it's taken, perhaps many, many months to stand up some HR technology. But now, particularly in relation to standalone solutions for things like talent performance and learning, they don't have the same complexities as a core HCM product. And actually, the way these SaaS organizations now operate is it's very quick to stand the products up. So I always recommend that during the negotiation phases, you do actually ask and you float and advocate for a pilot period. And this is something we did recently with a talent performance tool called Leapsome very successfully. And we were actually able to fully pilot with a section of our organization the tool, obviously in quite a minimum viable product way. But it just gave us that extra edge when it came to understanding the realities of using that product. And it was, very low cost during that pilot phase too. So, although those larger players are still probably a step behind here, I don't think we're going to be piloting SAP or Oracle or Workday anytime soon. Those solutions still take some time to stand up. If it is a smaller boutique player, definitely ask if you're able to pilot it either as a full organization or maybe a section if you're a larger organization. So next one is on doing the maths. Don't just look at the licenses and think, yeah, this works great. This is a great deal. Let's just compare it to other vendors today. Really think, well, what's our headcount going to be in 2 to 5 years? Is this sustainable? Will the numbers still make sense for us when we go through those meaningful changes as an organization? So the next one is on thinking global. So I know many of us, obviously we're Africa focused today, but many of us are operating in very global organizations. And one thing I don't often see is actually using the contracting country for your organization tactically. So what I'd recommend, just to give an example, I suppose, if you are based outside of some of the base or HQ locations of these tech vendors, so many are based in San Francisco or Western Europe, for example, and if you're based outside of those locations and you contract with them in your HQ country, you can sometimes be left with, and maybe it's unfair to call them the B team, but certainly teams which are not at the center of everything, maybe don't have the same connections to product management. It's not really the A team in terms of account management, customer success, and also relationships with partners as well. You may get a very short list of, you can choose these partners to help you deploy this product. So I'd always recommend taking a look at the countries that you have entities in and actually thinking strategically about where you want to enter that relationship with either the tech vendor or with the partner in. Something to think about that often isn't addressed. So next one, I'd also consider how important you would be to that tech vendor or to that partner you want to engage with. Often you enter a relationship and everyone is really talking the talk during that pre-sales and that sales cycle. But when you're actually in production, you find you're maybe their smallest customer and you're really insignificant and you can't really advocate for changes that you want and actually to shape that product roadmap. Whereas actually, maybe it makes more sense for where you are as an organization to be the largest customer for a very small HR tech player, and they really take a leading role in shaping that roadmap and being a part of that customer ecosystem. That won't work for everyone. If you don't want to be that kind of advocate and you don't want to spend time with them, improving their product, that's not going to work for you. But certainly for some people, that can bring some real value. In to help out. Obviously, there's examples and scenarios, and there always will be, where you do need to lean on those other types of engagements and resources. But if you can, whether it's via an established existing network that's maybe kind of curated and managed by the vendor or the partner themselves, or whether you start your own customer networks and you reach out to different customers, we just found it to be really, really useful to share ideas and share solutions in a cost-effective and efficient way. So the next one on gaining buy-in and setting expectations. So I think really important and related items here in this phase 0 stage. So my biggest advice here is that systems only reflect the business requirements. They don't fix those gaps in your HR strategy. Your strategy before you deploy systems should always be clear already. And to give you, one example here, if your CEO comes to you and says, right, we have a huge problem with how we manage learning, for example. I would like your team to, deploy a program to give us a new LMS. And during that project, you'll come up with a whole new strategy for how we manage learning at the organization. And at that point, it's really important to manage expectations and push back because how we are managing learning, this should already be established. But when we're deploying systems, all we're really thinking about is then consolidating and collating those existing requirements and then really turning them into a technical solution. So really important to manage expectations, because sometimes fast-growing companies and small growing companies, a lot more pressure is applied to these kind of projects. And often the systems and the technology is on that roadmap and on that timeline before thinking more strategic about actually how are we going to manage this in the organization. So systems don't solve those type of problems. So ensure that clarity of thought and objectives is there in advance. The next one is on transparency. So I think it's really important to be real about sacrifices you have to make for the greater good. And often, certainly what we found and what I see others in our space struggle with is that at one point you're a small or medium enterprise and then you're growing into a large enterprise. And there's then a transition period where you maybe need to move away from a systems perspective from, best of breed products which work great for very small organizations and maybe have, brilliant user experience. But actually, when you think big picture, what you need is more of an ERP that can do, many more type mentality. Actually, you do have to be real about that. You have to say, well, okay, we might be giving up some of the customizations or some of the different best of breed products we have, but this is the reason we're making these sacrifices, and you need to ensure everyone is on board and take some ownership over that. Really important to get right. So then there's on the buy-in perspective. And I think maybe it links to what Pi was saying in the previous session around risk mitigation. Often people focus on highlighting to senior leadership why we should be doing this and all the great reasons. But I found it to be very effective to actually highlight, if we don't do this, what's going to happen? So if you focus on the money we'll end up spending if we don't do this, the operational issues that it could bring if we don't do this, and the risks of things like regulatory issues you might face further down the line, compliance issues, audit risks. If you highlight all of those big red flags, you often find that gets you more traction. And it's something, we don't often focus on because obviously we're very positive solutions focused people, but I find that often gets the traction you need with senior leadership a little bit quicker. So the next one is showing you're building systems and processes, not for now, but for the company that the leadership team themselves are aiming to build in 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And that does two things. So first and foremost, it shows that you're on the same page, you understand their vision, but it also shows that you're really thinking smart about scalability and the future, not just for now. And then it seems simple, but often we forget it. All of us as HR tech professionals and HR professionals is involve the business in the selection process. And we get so used to making these somewhat top-down decisions, and then really the business then becomes a passenger in that scenario rather than someone at the driver's seat. And the way I tend to tackle this, and we have as an organization, is bring people from the business in early and help them understand not just what you're aiming to do and asking them to validate the product, but really let them into the background of why we need this solution and the business objectives we're trying to achieve, and then help them take ownership of some of those decisions also, or at least the perceived ownership, right? And I found that's been a really useful tool. So deployment, the fun part. So first advice for deployment is building a team for the future. I've seen so many times this issue whereby you build this brilliant project team, and then majority of the project team disappears following a project, and then you're left thinking, well, where are we? How do we manage this? So firstly, consider a good mixture of knowledge from the business and also bringing people in who have great knowledge of the product. So you need to get that balance really correct for a successful project team. You need that knowledge of the business so you can not just understand the requirements and make them clear for the vendor or partner, but also really understand those complexities around, what's reality, what's our life in production going to be like, and what struggles will we have to deal with, and then helping bring that to life for the people who understand the product a bit better. And those people that understand their product, you can bring them in as permanent staff. That would be ideal because you can retain them in the future, or you can, bring in partners and contractors who can get to know your business over an extended period. Other thing to remember, in fast growth companies like ours, everyone is always overloaded and wearing many hats. So how we tackle this from a HR tech project perspective is, upfront with your vendors, and many of them do have this information, some don't, but you can always be pushy and ask them to provide this information. But they rather usefully provide, estimates of FTEs on the customer side that you're going to require during the project timeline and the life cycle. Really important to take these really seriously and use them as evidence to the rest of your leadership team as to how many people you actually need to make this work, and actually you need to be really aggressive about ring fencing that time throughout the project and making the most of it, right? And some people, I think they see those numbers and they think, hey, we can do it with just 1 or 2 people, it'll work, and then it doesn't, and they just get completely overloaded during that project. The next one is on building internal expertise as early as possible. So what I often see is you start a project and there's a kickoff call, and that's the first time the majority of the, whether it's contractors or external partners or new permanent hires are seeing each other. And I just think it's the complete wrong way to go about things. And if you are bringing in outsiders to help you go live with a new product, you should do it way before. As soon as you're thinking about some new HR technology, you should bring some experts in. And this really helps you avoid traps. It helps you with scoping. It helps you navigate that, sometimes complex RFP process. And what you don't want to do is bring those great minds in at a stage where you've already made the key decisions. You've maybe already fallen into some of these traps. So bring talent in as early as possible who really understand HR technology, ERP technology as a whole, really understand projects, really understand pre-sales. Really, really important to consider. The next one is considering shared responsibilities and lightweight deployment models. So this is another method to avoid this kind of brain drain when you go live and the project kind of drives out of town, as it were. And I think especially now when most organizations are trying to be extremely cost efficient, it makes a lot of sense to have a discussion, very frank discussion with your partners and vendors up front about wanting to take on more as a customer team. So whether that's taking on some of the configuration or some of the testing, or whether it's not giving so many roles to an external partner and asking for internal employees to actually take on those key project roles, it just means that you'll retain, first of all, they'll actually have an element of knowledge transfer through a project, but it also means you'll retain that knowledge when the partner rolls out of town. So really important, and also cost efficient if you're working on a more lightweight model where you don't welcome a partner who fills every project role and does everything for you. It certainly gives you the rod rather than the fish in that respect. And the last one here, again, it seems obvious, but I always like to call it out. Pick products and partners that match your company culture and ways of working. So it's no use if you're a 10-person startup and then you're engaging with a consultancy of hundreds of thousands globally. Really try and match not just the makeup of your company and the demographics, but really match the company culture and the ways of working. And you'll just find it's a really easy, quick trick to make sure that your project is set up for success. And that's not to say if you engage with a giant partner, it's definitely going to be a failure. In my experience, it just means it takes a few more weeks to really get into that correct frequency and that way of working. And you'll just find you gel a little bit better, and it's slightly better set up for success if you do pick the right partner and you have a similar culture and a similar way of approaching projects. So the next one is on the MVP approach. So I know this is something that Adora and the panelists were talking about as well, which is really great. But I found this is this is a concept that we don't really steal from product management enough in the HR technology space, and it's really about dialing down the amount of functionality we deliver in the first phases of a program, and focusing not just on the functionality we're delivering, but on all the other core elements here. So what we're saying is you shouldn't deliver every piece of functionality that you need from an HR technology in the first phase. You should rather, dial it down so it's the absolute minimum in terms of functionality, but you're delivering the reliability, the usability, and the brilliant design that you'll expect from the finished end product at the end of that program. And what it means is you're front loading a lot of the fun stuff that's going to increase your adoption, and that's going to really help with engagement with the product early on. And then it also sets you up for success so that you can then incrementally build on that product. And then what you do is you build your features over time, and a bit like the panel was suggesting, you build it in an agile way. As things change, you'll find that actually the features, the products, the modules you need will probably change also. And that's another value add from a risk perspective. If you're deploying less, of course, you're also actually risking less and you're spending less upfront. Next piece is consider every localization as a threat to your MVP, and really be aggressive in questioning every single localization, because in organizations which are highly dispersed and are fast growing, you really have to think not just about the now. So let's say you have a couple of countries outside your HQ country. Oh, this works in these couple of countries. We could make that work. We could have a manual workaround there. You really have to think about scale. Well, if every country was to have that, and it's not actually a legal or regulatory requirement in that country, this is going to cause a significant pain down the line. So always think person hours and maintenance hours down the line, not just now, but actually in the future. If we have other worker types, other business units, many more countries, what does that look like then? And that's really that minimum viable product concept. So the next one is on the right speed, the right time. So a good one for you Formula One fans out there now the season's up and running. So slow. So what I'm really referring to with this slow section is our phase zero phase we discussed previously. And I really advocate to have a very long and necessarily slow, but a long preparedness stage. And what this stage is really all about is having everything ready, having all of your ducks in a row. Design as you go. It works great if you have everything together already as an organization and everything is in place. But typically, I say many organizations like ours fall into that trap of looking to the system before the strategy is in place. So what you really want to do is you want to start to think about projects a little differently, and you want to have a long extended phase zero before you actually start your final project. And you don't want to find yourself, like many of us probably have in our careers, in a design or a discovery session with a partner or with a vendor, and they're asking you all these questions, but you haven't actually thought meaningfully about these questions. And we want to avoid that by having a long phase zero where you maybe bring in some external expertise as well. And you've already thought about all these questions. You have everything ready. You've really addressed everything. And you've kind of got this blueprint for success already written. And all you're doing when we get to that real deployment stage is you're executing on that plan. And I think that's a really critical mindset change that has to take place in a fast growing organization. And then when you want to be fast, when you really want to put the foot on the gas is during that deployment. So once you have your formal kickoff, from that point, if you're thinking about efficiency, you're really burning money immediately throughout that full project. So you want to reduce the actual project timeline because you want to make the most of this time that you're spending many resources on external partners and on vendors. And also, the longer this actual deployment phase lasts, the less relevant your requirements become, right? In this fast growing world, you can't be having your typical historic legacy system style 12-month plus deployment, because if you have this waterfall fashion, your requirements by the time you deploy your product are completely out of date. And maybe you're in new countries, you have new business units, you might have completely rethought your strategy with regards to HR or across your HQ functions by that point. So really important to be slow at first for phase zero, and then fast and assertive and really design with intent during that actual deployment stage. And then balanced. So one thing which you definitely don't want to be too fast with and you don't want to be too slow with is testing. So it's so critical to the success of every HR tech project. So just think about efficiency here. You can consider automation tools. There's some great tools out there that offer different automated testing solutions. And you can also consider this kind of risk-based test approach, whereby you're really focusing your testing effort on the most high-risk areas. But certainly that's one where you don't want to go too slow and you don't want to go too fast. So the next piece is on building the foundations right. So, as we talked about a bit yesterday with Grace, quality of data is one of the most underrated elements of HR technology and successful HR technology teams. And certainly it's the same for projects. And my advice would be, don't migrate that bad data, fix it now. Because from an ROI perspective, it makes no sense to invest in fancy new tools and a great employee experience if the foundations aren't correct. So again, in that phase zero, you really want to be focusing on quality of data and making sure that what you migrate is the level above what it previously was. And maybe it is great, but certainly what I've found in fast growth organizations, particularly where you operate in quite a dispersed manner, or you have different business units, or you've perhaps gone through some M&A, it often means you have data in different places, and that can be one of the key pain points. So really focus on that, bring in experts or allocate internal resource if you need to, but really try and fix every item you can before you move into your actual project. Is certainly one to focus on. And the next one, it's obvious, but aim for scalable and flexible solutions. You always want to be asking questions like, can we automate this? And can we change this in the future? You don't want to be stuck with something. Many of the components within modern HR solutions are flexible, but there are still elements, certainly that I'm aware of in solutions like Workday and SuccessFactors, where once you make this decision, there's no going back. You really can't change it. And those are the sort of decisions you really need to think carefully about and really future-proof, because you're not going to have that kind of business agility that we were talking about in the panel discussion if you have an HR solution which is, you know, stuck in one place, and actually you'd maybe have to go through a whole nother transformation project to reverse some of those decisions. So really make sure you're aware early of what those decisions are, and make sure you bring the right stakeholders into that discussion. And then be ready. So as I was saying, have that blueprint in place, and the sort of things you can be thinking about in that phase 0 phase: security and access management, the job catalog, compensation components. This is a huge one. You know, often you get into HR deployment projects and suddenly it's the first time that, you know, the comp and ben or the reward department have thought about, oh, actually, what do we want to do in this new HR tech system? And do we want to transform how we're operating our compensation at the moment? And that's not the time for those kind of discussions. That needs to happen way, way before. You should have much of that in place, and you should bring these artifacts with you on that journey. Detailed integration specification. So that's another one. This can be a real cause of delay on HR deployment projects. So have as much as you possibly can done in advance. Another obvious one, seems obvious, HR support model. So I can't count the times we've got into design sessions and no meaningful thought has been put into, well, actually, you know, how do we want our support model to operate and look like? Do we want to make some changes versus what it's like today? And often, you know, you get this excuse used by organizations that, well, we hadn't really thought about this. We thought we would just replicate what we had before, or we weren't sure what the system could do. But what you really want to do is you want to go into those discussions with those ideas fully formed in your head. And then the partner, the vendor, will then help you bring that to life as best they can. Org structure and headcount management approach. So just a couple of others there to consider. So life in production, I wanted to keep this one fairly short and sweet, and certainly on topic, but my biggest advice once you're actually live with HR technology in a fast growing company is experiment with agility. And I don't mean the agility mindset, you know, that should already be in place, you know, given the discussions we've had earlier today, but I really mean in terms of the development methodologies. So as a bit of a quick case study for us at Bolt, when we first went live, we had more of a traditional HRIS support model, but we just found it was much more about who was shouting loudest, and that really drove who had their issues resolved and looked at and investigated first. And we actually deployed Scrum, basic Scrum and Kanban. And the idea was effectively we operated in 1 week sprints. So Scrum as a particular agile methodology advocates for anything from a 1 week to a 1 month sprint. We went with a 1 week sprint actually because it correlated quite well with what our development tenants, the schedule they operated on for refreshing. So we basically got a development instance of our HCM for us to work on a weekly basis that was then refreshed from production. So we had 1 week sprints where we have a sprint planning meeting at the beginning of the week. We have a product backlog, which I as a product manager kind of keep maintained and prioritized on a regular basis. And then the team themselves, it's a pull rather than a push model. So the team actually pulls items from the product backlog based on priority and based on their capacity and their appetite for the week. They pull items from that backlog during that sprint planning meeting at the beginning of the week. And then we have 15-minute Scrum calls on a daily basis, something which I was actually quite resistant to at first, coming from a consulting background. You know, I had this vision of being weighed down by all these extra calls, and having a call every day wasn't my idea of this kind of new fun, agile way of working. Actually, what we found was it was short, it was sharp, it was at the beginning of the day, it got us energized, and it was very focused on removing blockers. You know, if we had any more deep dive discussions that we needed to have, we had those in a separate call and we took that offline. So we have those daily calls, and then at the end of the week, we have a sprint review where we really review what we were able to deliver in that time. And it just meant we were really able to, from an output perspective, absolutely turbocharge what we were able to deliver. And you see at the bottom here, we have a basic Kanban board that we moved our issues through on a weekly basis. And we actually saw, as a bit of a case study for you, a 50% increase in productivity within 2 months of using this basic Scrum and Kanban. So this would be my number one tip for life in production. So that's me. Thank you so much, everybody. Happy to take any questions if anyone has any.
All right. Thank you very much, Andy. So I think we have about 2 questions, and we have just roughly 2 minutes to round up the session. So we'll just go ahead and ask the questions. The first question says, don't you think it's important to primarily consider localization during employment of HR technology in a multinational instead of treating it as secondary?
So the reason I would always say is secondary in an organization like ours, which is very fast growth, is that if you think localization first, it's simply not scalable. So what you must do and how you mitigate and balance it, because I agree, one of the number one priorities of us as HR professionals is actually to make sure we're meeting our legal requirements and, you know, employment law within each country, and all of those regulations are met and we meet auditing requirements. So I think, you know, that those instances would certainly take precedence over a global approach, but really challenge all those items that really sit in between, whereby there isn't a local regulatory requirement, but actually it's much more about someone doesn't want that change impact and they're used to these ways of working, right? So I think certainly if it's a legal requirement locally, that comes first and foremost. It's more the gray area in between. So, you know, certainly investigate and actually check, well, you know, have we been doing this because we've always done it this way, or is there actually a legal requirement? And you often find, let's not forget, the law changes also, right? So it's always important to keep up to date on what is there. But we've just found if you focus on more of a global approach, it's far more scalable. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. I'm just going to take a last one more question and then we'll wrap it all up. The next question, if we haven't already considered what our ideal HR solution looks like, how would you suggest we go about finding out?
Yeah, brilliant question, and you're not alone. So my two biggest tips would be, first of all, you need some advice. So whether you get that from, as I talked about, more of an ad hoc network, and you start networking with organizations that are similar to you and maybe live with HR products already, or whether you recruit a permanent team member or bring in a contractor or a partner who's a real expert in that area, I think that's really the best approach you can take, purely because there's so much information out there that sometimes we can just get inundated and flooded with this information. And what you really need is someone that can deep dive with you on your organization, your pain points, your objectives, what you need, and then they can help really build a picture of the most suitable and the most bespoke tool for you as an organization. So I think that's the first thing, but obviously, there's cost involved there. So from an efficiency perspective, I would say make the most of those networks that are out there. There are many HR tech networks which are cost low or free for you to enter and really liaise with other people and hear not just from the sales professionals from these organizations and see their sales decks, but really hear from the customers themselves. And you'll find many of the top products have these really evangelical customers who like to preach all the great things about it, and just reach out to those guys and you'll often find they'll be really helpful in helping you along in that journey.
All right, thank you very much, Andy. I really do appreciate your participation in this conference, and we hope that when next we call you, you'll definitely come back.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, Tayo. Lovely to speak to you.
You sharing your the slides as well, so that we can share with the audience.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
It's a great day to everybody.